Okay, I want to go through chapter 2 now, which goes through grammatical form. And most of you understand the basis of the chapter, which is parts of speech. As you've gone through elementary school, junior high school, and high school, you've heard over and over again the parts of speech about nouns, verbs, pronouns, and everything else, interjections. You probably get a little bit confused on adjectives and adverbs, which one is which, and all that kind of stuff. And you might be able to recognize a preposition if you had to, but then you might not. So, and that's fine. This chapter is going to go over those things one more time, and you'll get a good handle on it. But I'm also going to reorganize things a bit. And this is the first step really moving towards what I've called a rhetorical grammar, is understanding grammar in such a way that you can use it, not so that you can be right or be precise. That's not the goal. Okay. Instead, the goal of this book is to get you to a point where you can use your understanding of grammar, much of it you already have. You can use it to develop your ideas and be more precise and more sophisticated in your writing. It's not about using big words, but about being precise, accurate, and functional in the way you operate in the English language. Okay, so that's the goal. And you're going to see some changes I'm going to make to many of the things you've already learned. Now, much of it pretty much stays the same, but some of these things are going to change. And it's going to change based on your relationship to the language, which it actually changes as you get older. Now, when you're younger, most of your understandings and your usages of language are in a very concrete manner. As you get older, and especially as you go to college, you're going to be called upon again and again and again to have a handle on more abstract ideas, on theories, notions, and ideas, and be able to explain them and be able to understand them, apply them in a way that's very effective. Okay, so, and that shows up in the grammar itself. Okay, so I'm going to get to that, and you'll see how things are going to change a little bit. Okay, let me get to this notion of form first, just so we understand what it is. And let me go to the book for a second. And form is what something is, and these are the parts of speech. Okay, that's what I'm going to deal with as form. And again, most people do have an idea of what form is, whether or not something is an adjective, adverb, or things like that. But it's very important to understand from the beginning that just because you have a word doesn't mean you have a definite part of speech. So you often have to figure out what the function of a word is before you can determine the form. So if you look in a dictionary at any time, you're going to see any single word can have multiple parts of speech to it. You can have a word like, hit. Hit can be a noun or it can be a verb. It can actually be an adjective also. So they can occupy different parts of speech, but which one it is in a sentence depends on what function it's following in that sentence. So for the sake of this chapter, I am going to separate form from function, but it's very important to understand you really can't do that. When you're using the language, form and function are going to overlap. They're going to inform each other. Certain forms are going to function only in certain ways. They have a limited number of functions, but it can be more than one. Okay, the word hit, for example, can function as a verb or as a noun. So there's going to be a back and forth between them when we actually get to it. So in chapter 3, that relationship is going to become clearer. But for now, I'm going to pull them apart and talk just about form. And then in chapter 3, I'm going to talk about function. And you're going to see that, okay, now I see how these things overlap with each other. They're going to go back and forth. So I'm going to ask your patience while we work through this chapter. But also keep in mind it will be a lot of review of things you've already learned. But I'm going to do something that's going to simplify it a little bit. I'm going to do, instead of the 8 parts of speech that you learned, probably when you're in 6th grade, I'm going to do 6 parts of speech to simplify things a little bit more. And I'm doing this because you really use language. And this is very important. You use language at 3 different levels. Okay, so I'm going to reduce it down to 6. One of the parts of speech I'm going to get rid of. Okay, So that's interjections. This is wow, bang, Pam, hey. Those types of words you do not use in a standard written context. In any formal writing, you're not going to be using exclamation points and all those kind of things and exclamation marks. You don't use those. They're not part of an essay. You should never, ever have to use, that part of speech in an essay. So I'm just getting rid of that. Okay, so interjections are gone. The other part of speech I'm going to actually kind of consume under another is pronouns. I'm going to call pronouns essentially nouns. I'm going to say that they're nouns. So that simplifies things, and that gets us down to 6 parts of speech. Okay, pronouns function almost exactly the same way as nouns. When you put them in your sentences, they're going to do almost the exact same things as nouns. So the distinctions between them really aren't important. And again, you know pronouns like he, she, they, we. And the other thing to understand is in standard written English, you should generally avoid pronouns if you can. Okay? In most cases, you need to name your nouns. Who is he, she, and what is that it? You need to name it in most cases because of the sophistication involved. Pronouns are a very vital part of speech in speaking. Okay, they're a very vital part of speech, but they're not so vital in writing. So I'm consuming it under the heading of noun. So that's what we're going to do. Next thing I'm going to do is put them in 3 different levels. Okay, and that's getting to this idea. It's an idea I introduced in chapter 1, which is that nouns and verbs really are, close to each other. They're brother and sister. Okay, they are essential for thinking, speaking, and writing. You have nothing to think about, say, or write if you do not have nouns and verbs. You cannot do it. They are, and my understanding is that they're universal to all languages throughout the world. I don't speak all languages throughout the world. I'm struggling with the one I do have, but they are universal. Okay, and other parts of speech don't always exist in other languages. I won't get into all the nuances of it, but prepositions, for example, didn't really exist in Latin, my other language. But anyway, so nouns and verbs are absolutely essential to your thinking, speaking, and writing. And I'm going to go through those together because those at their heart make up what are going to be called clauses. When we get to chapter 3 on clauses, you're going to see that nouns usually function as either subjects or as objects. That's what they do once they're put into a sentence. What they are is nouns. What they do is function as a subject or an object of a verb, either a subject of a verb or an object of a verb, or they can be an object of a preposition. So they have 2 and possibly 3 major functions. So that's what they do. Verbs are an odd little thing because they are both a form, but they are also a function. The same name gets applied to the form and to the function. So verbs, guess what? They function as verbs, okay? And we're going to go through the nuances of them in this video, and I'll get to the other parts of speech in the next video. But right now we're going to focus on nouns and verbs and how they relate to each other. And they always go hand in hand in one way or another, or almost always go hand in hand, and they are the core of thought, of speech, and writing. Now, the next thing to understand, before we get into the nouns and verbs more, is that adjectives and adverbs are the next level. They are used to provide detail and precision to nouns and verbs. You actually do not absolutely need them in our grammatically speaking or grammatically writing. You don't. You can write without adjectives and adverbs. You will, however, write like a first grader or at best a second grader. And if you look at children's books, they are almost entirely nouns and verbs. That's what they are. Okay, and that's what they do. They don't get into much nuance and detail. Okay, adjectives and adverbs give detail. They go into nuance and they give you precision in your writing. If you're going to write well and you're going to write effectively, which I assume everybody in English 101 wants to do, you need to understand how adjectives and adverbs work. So first thing we're going to do is get into identifying them, and then we're going to get into how they function and how you can use them better. The last 2 parts of speech are prepositions and conjunctions. Now, it's very important to understand that these two parts of speech have almost no meaning, almost none. If you think of a preposition like in, well, you can think, well, inside something like this, but what if I said in an hour? Okay. Or if I did something in anger, am I inside my anger and that's a box? No, the meaning of in isn't consistent and it isn't clear. Conjunctions with the same thing. How, it's the main conjunctions are and, but, and or. Those are called the coordinating conjunctions. Wouldn't you love to define the word or? How could you define it? What people do is they give examples immediately. In other words, they put it to work. Both prepositions and conjunctions have almost no meaning to them. Okay, they have almost no meaning. What they do is set up relationships of nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs. That's what they do. These guys organize these guys. That's what they do. They tell them where to sit, where to go, and how I'm going to hook you up. That's what they do. Okay, so they are the ones that organize. I guess they're kind of like the the social ones. They get everybody together, sat down here, there, everywhere, and introduce everybody to each other. They are not important for their meaning. They are important for the relationships they create amongst these parts of speech. Okay, so they have almost no meaning to them. We'll get to those towards the end. Being able to use these well means that you can handle more sophisticated and elegant thinking and precise thinking. These are part of making you into a good writer. Notice one thing I keep coming back to. It is not about using big words. It just isn't. Okay? It's about organizing in your thoughts and making them precise with these three different levels. And you're going to be toggling between these three levels in order to write well. You don't need big fancy words. Okay? So let me go through, and I'll come back to the book in a bit and go through some of the exercises. Let's go through nouns and verbs first. Okay? Nouns and verbs are the first level. They are the basis for thought, they're the basis for speech, they're the basis for writing. Okay? Nouns, as you've been told, are persons, places, and things, but they are also, and I mentioned this in the book, characteristics, activities, and ideas. That's where people get confused, is on these three. Most people can handle person, places, or things, but you can have sadness be a noun. It can be. In fact, it usually is. Activities such as throwing and cooking, those can be nouns, and they can operate as subjects or as objects. Okay. Ideas such as liberty or injustice or things like that, those are nouns. And they, again, can function as either subjects or objects in sentences. Okay. Those are more abstract. Verbs is where a lot of confusion happens over an idea that was, so with nouns, I want to be clear, most students know person, place, or thing. I haven't had a student yet in all my years of teaching who didn't know that a noun was a person, place, or thing. Where students most often struggle is the other aspect, that nouns can be characteristics, activities, or ideas. So this is something where your high school grammar often skipped. Often, not always, some of you might know it, and that's great. Okay, hug your English teacher if you do. If not, just give them a punch in the arm. Okay. This is where students struggle. And remember that thing, as you get older and you're writing in college, you're going to be dealing with more of these characteristics, activities, and ideas. Okay. Now with verbs, there is a very, very important problem because you were always taught that verbs are actions. That is a big, big problem. Okay. It can be. They often are. Okay. They are things that people do or that things do. They can be. But they can also be linking verbs. And linking verbs don't involve any type of action. That's where the confusion often happens. And these verbs, there's a limited list of them, but they do an enormous amount of work in the English language, especially in speaking, but also in writing. They usually set up a situation where you're describing something. Okay, that's what they do, and they are not actions. So they do a lot of work in the English language. If you've heard about helping verbs or auxiliary verbs, they always help with actions or they help with linkings. They are never the verb on themselves, by themselves. Okay, so let me go to the back to the book really quickly and show you some of this. Now, one of the big issues with nouns is understanding. Most of you guys can understand that judge. If I took the sentence fair judge, listen to both sides in the dispute. Judge is one of the nouns. Sides is a noun. Dispute is a noun. Okay. Judge is here a noun. Fairness is the more abstract noun. That's a characteristic. Sides is still a noun. And dispute is a noun. Okay. So some of these words can be a little more abstract, a little bit difficult to follow. So let me go through this. This is one of the exercises 2-1. Circle the nouns in the sentence, and let me just give you a few of them. Most folks are pretty good on ones like this. The dog and floors. Okay. And all you gotta do is circle them. Bridget comes home. Let me get myself out of the way here. If you picked you, I'm totally fine with it. That's a pronoun. If you didn't pick it, I'm fine with it too. You is a pronoun. Mess is a noun, and kitchen is a noun. If you're going to miss any, it's going to be you, and that's forgivable. But mess is a noun. Okay. One little hint, if it has the word the in front of it, huge is describing the mess. But if it has the word the in front of it, you probably have a noun. You almost certainly do, like you do with the kitchen. With 3, somebody is a noun. It's essentially a pronoun. Jim is a noun. House is a noun. I know many people think coffee is a noun, and it can be, but not in this case. Coffee here is describing the noun house. So it's a coffee house, like a pancake house or a blue house. So that's describing it. Okay. So in number 4, slice is the first noun. Cheesecake, counter, and 1, dogs. Okay, so those are the nouns. I should mention to you, by the way, 12 is also a noun. Numbers can be nouns. So, you know, they are, none is a noun, and things like that. See how well you do with this. Just do your best. And let me jump on to the next one. Okay. Pronouns, yeah, just treat them as nouns for now. Again, they lose their importance, and they're still important, but they're not nearly as important as they are in speech. Okay. So I'm not going to do that one. You guys are usually okay with that. Gerunds are where people get confused. Okay. These are ing words. Now, this is part of the problem of when you are told that verbs are actions. Activities are easy to confuse with actions. Completing here is a noun. It's what's called a gerund. I don't need you to memorize gerund. There's also another word called gerundive, because completing can actually be an adjective. We won't worry about that. Completing here is a noun. The process of completing something should take 10 minutes. That's the verb, should take. Completing is the subject. It's a noun. Okay. Running up the stairs left Jerome out of breath. The actual running, the activity of running, left Jerome out of breath. That's what it did. The running itself did it. The stairs didn't do it. The running did. Okay. So running is the noun. Okay. It's an activity. We should finish writing. Writing here is not a verb. It's an activity. So whenever you see an ing word, it's very important to know. Don't assume it's a verb. That is probably one of the most common misconceptions I see with verbs and with nouns, is mixing gerunds with verbs. Okay, so be aware of that. Why I put nouns and verbs together is that oddly in the language they relate to each other. They do. We often turn nouns into verbs and verbs into nouns. It's like they jump back and forth all the time. So, so let me review nouns for you just really quickly. So let me do an exercise with the gerunds. And circle the gerund in each sentence. Running is the gerund. That's what takes a lot of money. Heard the crunching. Sally is the subject. Heard is the verb. Crunching is the action or the activity that she heard that was going on with the rocks, or I guess inside the couch. Forgetting is a noun. That forgetting is doing the verb can get. Okay. The crunching is the activity that's happening with the chips. Okay. Arguing with your grandmother is a good way to get dropped from the wheel. Don't do that. Okay, guys. So Arguing is the activity. So take a look at these, and I do find that is a common source of confusion. Okay, let me go back to nouns and just review what they are here. So nouns, I'm going to put in the same category nouns, pronouns, and gerunds. Okay, we're going to call all of them essentially nouns. Okay, because they're going to all function the same. Gerunds can be subjects, they can be objects. Okay, they can even be objects of prepositions. We're going to get to that later. So the two main types of nouns are the concrete nouns, and those are the ones you knew when you started this class. The abstract ones are the ones that cause students trouble. Okay, just keep in mind that ideas, activities, and characteristics, and aren't those the things you start dealing with more and more as you get older and older, is dealing more in abstractions. How to organize things, conceive of things, see through things, explain things. Those are the ideas, activities, and characteristics you're going to be working with more as a college-educated student. Okay, so that's what nouns are. Okay, let me jump over to verbs, and let me give you a quick review of those. Verbs, there's really four, really in the end there's two types of verbs, but four ones I want you to be able to understand. Okay, two I really want you to focus on. First are infinitives. These are a neutral form of the verb. And let me go down to infinitives. So infinitives are this odd little neutral form. All action and linking verbs have infinitive forms. These are to jump, to feel, to do, to move, to appear. It's the form that has the to in front of it. Okay, that's the neutral form of the verb. In other languages, they usually have a neutral form, but they put like an ER in the end quite often, you know, for example, or an IR in Spanish, and some of the, you know, in Italian and things like that. It's a single word in other languages. In English, we have a two-word infinitive. These can't have a subject. You can't say I to move or he to run. It's a neutral form of the verb, so just be aware of it. When you see these, to move, to jump, to sing, these cannot be. These cannot function as the main verb in the infinitive form. The infinitive form is a lot like the bat boy. Handles bats all day, all about bats, but he never gets to go to bat. So that's what the infinitive is. It can never, ever function as a verb in a sentence. It's odd that the neutral form of a verb really functions like a noun. So it's an infinitive form of a verb, but once it actually functions, it jumps over to what nouns do. It either functions as a subject or an object. It's kind of funny. So, but just all I want you to know about infinitives is they can never, ever, ever function as the main verb. Okay? They can't function as one. Now, getting to the other two types of verbs, okay? Really what I want you to learn is that there are two types of verbs. That's what I want you to really get your mind around. In a practical sense, there are only action and linking verbs. That's it. Action or linking. All sentences in the English language are either going to use action verbs or they're going to use linking verbs. Okay? There's not this in-between where the verb can be kind of action, kind of linking. It will never be. Once you actually get to a sentence, that sentence is going to use either an action or a linking, or however I did it. Okay? There's a real divide between these two. And the sentence you have is either an action sentence or a linking sentence. The one thing to get out of your mind is that verbs are always actions. Because when it's a linking verb, there's no action going on. And when it's an action verb, there's no linking going on. You're either on one side of the plate or the other. You can't stand in the middle and expect them to pitch to you. You're going to get hit. Okay? One side or the other. So with action verbs are what your high school English teacher told you. Those are the actions that subjects undertake. Those are the things that people do. James wrote 3 letters to his girlfriend. The postman always rings. Rings is your verb. That's what he's doing. Okay. Don never delivers. Delivers is what Don did. It's what people and things do. Okay. So action verbs I don't find students get confused over. I find this is probably one of the easiest exercises in the book. Columbus landed at Trinidad, took took much longer. He and his crew depleted. Students get this one right. Okay, no problem there. The other type of verb, and when we go to the other side, is a linking verb, and it's very important to understand. Sing it with me. You're either an action verb or you're a linking verb. Action, linking. Nothing in between. Okay, that's the way linking verbs are. They are entirely different from action verbs, and they're very common. Very common. This is why all your English teachers, you might have to go back and punch them in the arm. When you have a sentence like this, Susie was cold, there is no action. And that is a perfectly acceptable English sentence. There is nothing wrong with it. George looked good in his new suit and tie. That's not an action. George isn't looking at anything. I'm describing him. It's his way of being. It's his, you may have heard linking verbs called state of being verbs. Okay? And when you are a linking verb, there is no action. None at all. I'm describing him. Okay? The cheese smelled magnificent. Okay? Again, the cheese is not doing anything. It's not smelling. In this sense, I'm instead describing what's going on with it. Okay? So if you have that definition, that linking verbs are state of being verbs, that is a true definition. It is. So Susie, I'm describing her state of being as being cold. George, I'm describing his state of being as being good in his new suit and tie. The cheese, I'm describing as magnificent. And notice all of these, well, if you take a look at cheese smelled magnificent, you can actually swap in, the verb to be in there. The cheese is magnificent. And that, you can see it basically makes sense. Okay, I'm describing it. What these linking verbs do, and here I have to give credit to my professor for Latin for many years, Professor Haley. She said, linking verbs are A equals B. That's how they function. And here's the list of the most common linking verbs. There are a few others, but this list, you can see, this list shows up all over the place. These are all over the place. Now there's about 2 to 3 of them, and I forgot one on this list. That's mea culpa. The one I forgot on here is to become. To become should be here. To be and to become, but also to seem, are almost always linking verbs. Okay? These others can either be linking or they can be action. They can't be somewhere in between. Once they're put into a sentence, they must pick a side of the plate to bat from. If I use a sentence like, Jeremy got cold, that is, I'm describing Jeremy. That's Jeremy equals the cold. I'm describing him. He didn't go out, get a box of cold and put it in his pocket and walk out. Okay? He didn't do that. But if I say Jeremy got the baseball, he went out and got the baseball, and now he's got it and he's going home with it. Okay? That's what he's doing. He's not the baseball. So Jeremy got cold is me describing him. That's a linking verb. Jeremy got the baseball. That's an action verb. Most of these verbs, and all of them except for to be, to seem, and to become, the rest of them can be either linking or action. But if you're not on this list, you're not going to be a linking verb. So get that logic down. Run can never be a linking verb. It can't. It's an action verb. Okay? But if you get a verb like smell, that can be a linking or an action, and you have to think about it. If I say Susie smells the roses, she's doing something. She's smelling the roses. Okay? But if I say the roses smell nice, the roses aren't doing anything. The roses are nice. That's A equals B. So understand that about linking verbs. Most of them can go over to the action side, if you look at the list. Sometimes these can be actions, sometimes linking. But whenever they're put into a sentence, they are either one or the other. Okay? Never in between. And then you always see the logic of A, the crowd remained calm. The crowd is not doing anything. The crowd is just being described as calm. A equals B. That's what it is. Okay. The model looks magnificent in his feather boa and leather chaps. He's not doing anything. In fact, I hope he doesn't. I'm just describing him as magnificent. Okay, that's all I'm doing. A equals B. Okay, that's what it is. So that is all verbs are either action verbs or linking verbs. All verbs are either action verbs or linking verbs. And you notice these, Don felt terrible. He didn't do anything. A equals B. He didn't touch the terrible. That would be weird. Okay. Probably should introduce him to that model. Huh? The sun seems hotter. A equals B. The sun didn't do anything. Boris and Natasha appear happy. A equals B. All of these are A equals B sentences. That's what they are. Okay. Now the last thing I want to cover is, so that's the action verbs and the linking verbs. So always think of verbs as either action or linking. The last one I want to cover in the whole verb situation is the helping verb. Helping verbs either help out action or linking verbs. They never, ever operate alone. And they were always, always, always stacked in front of either an action verb or a linking verb. Always. No exception. Period. So they never operate alone. They must help out either an action or a linking verb. That's what they must do, or else they're not helping anymore. Okay? And they never are alone, and they create what's called a verb phrase. That's what they do. Okay? And you can see one here. Could is a helping verb, have is a helping verb, been is a helping verb, singing is the last verb. That's an action. That's something you do. So your full verb here is helping, 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 action. This remains an action phrase. That's what this is. An action phrase, the last one in the verb line is the main one. And that main one is either an action or a linking every single time. No exceptions, okay, at all. And I know you're probably used to English having all these exceptions, and this is a little more complicated than you wanted on the verbs, but I'll tell you, it's kind of nice not having any exceptions. Once you get this logic down to the verb, you got it, okay? And so let's look at this one. Susie could have been an opera star. Okay, it's got 3 words in the verb. Could, that's a helping verb. Have is a helping verb. Been, that's your main verb. It must be either an action or a linking. Can you go around binning? No, that sounds weird. Okay, you can't do that. Instead, what you have is an A equals B sentence. That's what you have. Okay, it's an A equals B. Look at your last word in your verb phrase, and that determines what kind of verb phrase you really have. Notice the funny thing. Been can be a helping verb, or it can be a main verb. How do you know the difference? By the position. If it's in the position of a helping verb, it's a helping verb. But if it's standing as the last one in the line, that's a linking verb. So last one in line is always, always, always either an action verb or a linking verb. Always. So if it's last in line, it can't be a helping verb. It must be the main verb. And you can't do a been. Okay? That's a linking verb. Susie equals an opera star. That's what it's doing. So in this one, Susie could have been singing. This is could have been doing something. Could have been singing in the opera. So that's verbs, guys. That's how they work. So, and that's all you need to know about verbs. It's a little more complicated than you probably wanted, but that's all there is. You now understand all verbs in the English language. You've got it down. Okay? All right, I'll put up the video on every other part of speech right after this. If you've got this down, you've got the foundation of form. Okay, take care.